Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Molly Ackland and I'm the new Content and Communications Manager here at Morpay, covering the lovely Hannah while she's on maternity leave. It's my pleasure to be able to introduce the topic for you today, which is a menopause strategy to support your employees. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we start the webinar this morning. In terms of the agenda for this morning, Michelle will start off by giving you an overview of the menopause and will touch on the symptoms that people experience. She'll move on to the importance of writing an effective menopause policy and what should be included. Michelle will then cover how employers can support employees with their symptoms, including establishing support systems and breaking down the stigma surrounding the menopause and embracing inclusivity. Finally, she'll discuss turning thoughts into action and delivering your menopause strategy before we move into the Q&A section. So if you're wondering how to ask a question, after the main presentation, we'll move into the Q&A section of the webinar. You may have noticed your microphone is on mute, but we do want to hear from you. So please drop your questions into the question panel shown here. We've had a really incredible response to this webinar, so I imagine we'll have lots of questions, but Michelle will do her best to get through as many as she can at the end of the session. And another note, if you are facing any technical difficulties, don't worry too much. We'll be sending you all a recording later on today. However, if you are facing any technical difficulties, please do flag it up in this question panel, because if lots of them come flooding in, then I'll know there's an issue at our end and I'll do my best to fix it. So before I hand over to Michelle, I'm conscious that we have a few people on this webinar that aren't familiar with Morpay. So I'm going to give a very brief introduction. So we provide payroll and HR software as well as outsourcing services to UK businesses. We've been around since 1966, have all the accreditations you'd expect, and we're rated excellent on Trustpilot. Our promise is to make payroll and HR easy, and here's how we do it. So we've built payroll and HR software that's easy. We deliver quality outsourcing options. And all of this means worry-free compliance for businesses. On the slide, you'll see some of the businesses who trust us to take care of their payroll and HR. So that's enough about us. Let's meet today's presenter. So I'll just start by introducing you to Michelle, who you may recognise if you've attended some of our webinars in the past. Michelle is our HR Services Director and she's been with Morpay since 2017. She is CIPD qualified with 20 years of both operational and strategic HR experience. Michelle is responsible for running all HR services activities within Morpay. Good morning, Michelle. I'll now hand over to yourself to get started on today's webinar.
Thank you, Molly. Thanks for the introduction, and thank you everyone for joining today. Menopause is a topic that really is gaining traction within the workplace, and at Morpay we're definitely seeing an increase in customers asking for advice, whether that's on individual cases or they're looking for more general support around implementing policies and strategies. I think when we look at it overall, society has made progress in general around female equality in the workplace. There are still things to do, but there are more open discussions and support around things like pregnancy, maternity, flexible working. But I think there is more to do, and this is one of the areas. In some ways, it really still feels like menopause is a taboo subject, and people don't really know how to approach it. There's not much talked about in the workplace. And at Morpay, we want to really be part of that breaking a stigma, to be open and honest and to just face head on into the topic. So the first thing I'm going to start with is just by talking about what the menopause is. I'm sure most of us have an understanding or an idea whether it's something that's affected us ourselves or partners or wives, or we've seen our mothers go through it. But effectively, the menopause occurs when people stop having their periods permanently for 12 months. And most women will reach menopause around the age of 50. But it's important to note that the lead up to this can take up to 10 years. And this is known as the perimenopause. And this is actually where there can be a huge amount of symptoms that affect people in the workplace and at home. It isn't just something that kind of happens and move on from it. It can be a very long process. When looking at the detail of how this may impact people in the workplace, the CIPD did quite a detailed survey, and some really interesting stats came up from it. 70% of the employees who were surveyed said that they had experienced menopause-related symptoms, and we'll come on shortly to what they may be. 1 in 10 people who had experienced menopause symptoms or were going through the menopause, aged 45 to 55, actually left the workforce and left their workplace due to their symptoms, and that's quite a staggering stat. 84% of the respondents who felt unsupported said that their menopause symptom had mostly a negative effect on them at work. Interestingly, individuals surveyed actually said that they felt most supported by their colleagues, so more around their peers than management and leadership. But around a quarter actually said, only a quarter, sorry, said that their organisation actually had some kind of menopause policy or other support measures in place. That is still quite a low number of workplaces. We just go on to the next slide then, just talking a little bit more detail about the actual menopause itself. I think it is important to know that there are a huge amount of symptoms. If you look on any kind of NHS websites or any menopause websites, you'll see that there are many, many different symptoms that can be associated with both the menopause and the perimenopause. And it does affect people in different ways. Some people can have quite a sort of a limited impact and may not suffer from many of these symptoms and feel like it was relatively okay going through the menopause, and other people can have really debilitating symptoms. It will vary from person to person, and again, that's important for us as organisations to note. When talking about the menopause then, sorry, we're just flicking through the slides. We'll just go back to the menopause one. Just bear with us 1 second. Perfect, thank you. Just looking there on the right hand side then around the most common symptoms, and I've just put some up there for you to think about. Things like hot flushes or flashes as people call them, mood swings, night sweats, loss of memory, irritability, tearfulness, what's known as brain fog, and can quite closely linked there with confusion, thinning hair, anxiety, panic attacks. And as I said, when there's over 100 potential different symptoms, this really is a snapshot of what may be happening to people whilst they're going through the menopause or perimenopause, and it can be quite staggering. But just looking back at that stat that I mentioned on the first page, 1 in 10 people have said that they have quit their job because of menopause symptoms, and that is something that I'd really like you to bear in mind whilst we're going through this, and really to underpin why this is so important for you as an organisation to take seriously. We go on to the next slide then. What I really want to do now is focus on what you can do as an organisation, as business owners, as leaders, to support and implement policies. And it's all about not just creating the policies, it's about embedding a supportive culture in the organisation that is really going to help people going through this. So first of all, thinking about the significance of a menopause policy. As with most considerations around people in your workplace, actually laying out a standalone policy and plan can have real benefits and serves a number of purposes. So we're thinking about the menopause and the policy that you could potentially put in place. It really would help act as a prompt so that you can systematically audit your policy provision around this, and you've got it written down how you will approach it, how you will support, and what managers, team leaders, and leaders in the organisation and colleagues as well can do to support this. It does also help the business think strategically about how to develop a framework. You know, some of your top talent in your organisation may fall into this category, and surely you'd want to do things that will help them kind of come through this time in their life and feel that they are most supported and they are still able to give to their job what they want to do. It helps lay out how you can collaborate with external partners, which I'll talk a little bit more about later, but things like occupational health and employee assistance programs and looking where that external support is. One thing that I will say is don't be kind of frightened or put off that we expect that people in organisations who are putting these policies in place or leaders should suddenly become experts in the menopause. There is lots of other experts out there, whether it's medical experts, whether it's leading charities or leading organisations. We are just trying to help you put these policies in place so you can pull together all the right elements to make this work. And I think the other point is it just really helps provide clarity for managers and employees alike around setting out key responsibilities, expectations, and as with every employee relations issue, and often menopause can become an issue if it impacts things like absence, it helps everyone know where to stand. It really provides that clarity and framework, but it's done from a proactive perspective rather than a reactive perspective. So on to the next slide then. What is in a menopause policy and what should this look like? Now, we have had quite a few of our customers at Morpay come to us recently to help them write a menopause policy, and we have done that really successfully, and it's really good to be engaging with people at this proactive level. If you go on our website, you'll find a number of articles and blogs as well that's been written by our team members in this, so there's a lot more information you can get. But just to summarise what should be in a menopause policy, you should make sure that it's consistent with all your wider people policies, and make sure it's of the same tone and of the same messaging. But really, it will give you a statement of principles. It will allow you to put objectives in there of what you are trying to achieve as an organisation, help define and write down potential definitions and symptoms of the menopause so that everyone is coming at it from the same platform. It lays out key responsibilities of individuals within the organisation, and it lays out what activities and initiatives need to be implemented under the policy. And we've seen some real successes on the back of this in terms of colleagues have reacted to the policy in place and a real sense of engagement. So there are real benefits of putting these policies in place. On the next slide then, what I would like to talk about is really about supporting employees and their symptoms. And employers can, in a number of ways, support menopausal employees. And this is just thinking about how you can practically do this. The first three things that we talk about on the left-hand side of the slide are really all around communication. And the top one, and it's something that I always advocate in any of these topics, is really tackling head on by educating and myth busting with your employees, especially when it is a sensitive and potentially, let's be honest, it might be a bit of an awkward and embarrassing topic to talk about to your employees as a group, as a whole. But it is really important to start educating people and making them understand actually what happens in the menopause and why it's important that we all know about it. There are a number of different ways you can educate people, but often training or briefing sessions can help. Now, you can do this for your employees as a whole, but it'd be really good to think about doing this specifically for managers who may have to deal with an employee in their team who is suffering negative effects from this. So think about how you could put together a training or a briefing session for those managers, have them in a room, take some time out from their day job to really sit and have open discussions. Obviously, you'll have a framework for that training, and that can be created by your teams internally. That is something that Morpay and the HR consultants within Morpay can help with. But allow time for those open discussions, allow people to feel comfortable in asking questions that they might not have done before. And that is the best way to get people educated. And then just in general, sharing information about the menopause with employees, whether this is in newsletters or articles or blogs, even if it is just sharing something that another company has written, like one of our articles, on the menopause. Just sharing that out as part of education and information given to your employees just raises this as a topic that your business sees as important. And then some of the more practical things is around adapting policies. So you may have now, or you may be thinking about putting in a menopause policy, which will lay out how you're going to approach it. But do think about the other policies that it links to. And the most obvious one to think about is around absence policies. Because the thing that we've seen is that people going through the menopause and having negative effects from the symptoms, it can impact their attendance and absence. So look at your absence policy, see how they link together and how you will treat absences related to menopause. And you can make the decision that's right for your business. Always seek advice on how you're going to do that to, one, make sure it's legal, but that you've also got the right balance of support in place. But really make sure that you look at the other policies and in particular absence and how that should be adapted. A great thing to think about is peer support groups. Getting people together who have either been through the menopause, going through the menopause, or it might even be someone who says, I've not been through it myself, but I've supported a partner, a friend, a mother through this, and I've seen it from a different perspective. Gathering together a support group is a really good informal way to have a channel for your employees who are going through this, somewhere that they feel can be a safe space. And I think having a support group or maybe even some kind of working group could really help you when you're putting these policies and strategies in place. If you have real people who have been through this or have seen this or who have ideas on this, and they are the people who work for you, they're much more likely to buy into the support and policies that you're putting in place if they've been involved at the beginning. And then last but not least is thinking about the practicality of flexible working. Now, obviously, there's a lot of talk about flexible working dating right back to COVID days and home working and the real change for a lot of organisations in how we work going forward. The recent changes in employment law around flexible working requests. Think about how you could approach flexible working requests from people who are suffering negatively with menopause symptoms and how this may help them navigate their way through this time in their life and allowing them to continue to work. So make sure as another policy that you look at, you think about the flexible working and weave that in to what you're laying out is going to be your focus. And I just think in general, we shouldn't underestimate how much impact a considerate and understanding manager can have. It really can make a huge difference on people. Managers should really be prepared to listen to anyone who wants to talk about it, share their symptoms, and approach how you tackle it going forward with compassion and understanding, and helping managers through that with the training, with having the policies in place, with having the frameworks, knowing where external support is, that will make a real difference. So moving on to the next slide then. I talked before about not worrying about becoming an expert in all things menopause. That may feel like quite a frightening task, especially if it's something you've not experienced, have not seen anyone close to you experience. But there are lots of ways, both internally and externally, that you can draw on that support, and you can just be the anchor for that person. We talked already quite a lot about training staff members, and another way to think about it, as well as just training and educating, you can think about training staff members to become menopause or wellbeing champions. You may already have wellbeing champions in your business, and it's just maybe making sure that they are trained in a certain level of knowledge around menopause, so that they feel that they can help for that specific area. Whether that's something you can train internally or look externally to a company or charity or organisation that can come in and give this. But having those champions in place, a bit like we've always had, fire safety first aiders, now we talk a lot about mental health first aiders, having those kind of people in the organisation, along with support from HR, can really help both individuals and managers feel that there are places to go. And this could really lead to things like running workshops to raise awareness, just promoting supportive cultures, possibly health and safety risk assessments, like you would do for somebody who is pregnant, and then think about the support network that's being set up. It's just all different avenues to consider. I'm conscious when we do these webinars that in a very short space of time, we always give you a lot of information, but it's really just to kind of plant the seeds of all the things that you can do, and then you can take these slides away after the event, listen back to the recording, and really think about what's right for your organisation. But a big thing I want to talk about here is around external advice and support. And I think it's really important that you look beyond your organisation to see where you can get support. The biggest thing and piece of advice that I would give you with this is don't offer medical advice. No one is expecting you to be a medical expert, and it's exactly the same with other absence issues that you might come across. You may have an opinion, you may want to offer some words of advice and comfort, but really steer clear of offering medical advice. It is about offering support. You can always suggest that the employee seeks support from their GP if they haven't done already. Signpost your employee to the EAP if you have one, and if you don't have an EAP, it's something that I would seriously consider you look at. So there's an external place that an employee can go for support and advice that's probably more tailored. There may be some counselling services that are part of that EAP, and just things that are really helpful. Occupational health is always something that is really important. And I think if there is a medical capability issue of any kind in your organisation, occupational health is absolutely key to be able to get the medical evidence you need to help you make decisions. If you don't have an occupational health provider, there are many out there. We actually partner with one in Morpay called Honeydew, and our customers are supported through our advice line, and kind of partner with Honeydew to get that medical advice, and that's the sort of thing that would help in a menopause situation. And then finally, there are lots of other resources out there, but one that we kind of wanted to draw your attention to, if you want to do some Googling later, is a website called Menopause Doctor, which was set up by a menopause specialist called Dr. Louise Newson. I think we found a lot of important information on there, and it's great for managers to be able to look on there, for organisations, but it also may be something that you share with your employees as well. And again, just giving them another support. But it's important to have that balance of internal and external, and not feel as an organisation that you have to take it on all yourselves and have all the answers. There is a lot of information out there. So on to the next slide then. Talked about this at the beginning, that at Morpay we really want to be kind of charging at the front along with other people, breaking the stigma on this. And it's really important that we tackle some of these potentially embarrassing issues or awkward issues, and just tackling them head on, being open, honest, and just talking about it. And if you think around the stigma of the menopause, based on a survey by the CIPD of those who were surveyed around menopause, most of the individuals in that survey around the ages of 40 to 60 have experienced symptoms relating to the menopause transition. Obviously, as I said at the beginning, this is to differing levels. Some people may feel like they breeze through it, others are quite debilitating. But the vast majority of people in that age category, and women in that age category, are experiencing some symptoms, and they are likely to have some kind of impact on the workplace. Over half the respondents said that they have actually been unable to go to work at some point because of this. And that really does translate into a huge absence problem. And if you're looking at it practically from your organisation point of view, having an absence problem because of the menopause, is that something that you can do something about and kind of turn the tide on that? Most common symptoms reported are psychological, so relate to things such as mood disturbance, anxiety, depression, memory loss, panic, loss of confidence, and reduced concentration. And that was reported by 2/3 of the respondents. And when you look at that list of symptoms, you can understand why people going through the perimenopause or menopause are really feeling that this is having an impact on their ability to perform in work as they may have done previously. And then a study published in the Journal of Women's Health reported that 37% of menopause individuals felt some kind of shame related to their symptoms, and that's a really sad statistic. It's something that it's quite a stark statistic, and we really need to think about. In 2024, we should not be allowing people and women going through menopause to feel shame because of their symptoms. We should be supportive about it, and we should be celebrating what those people are bringing to the workplace and encouraging them to keep doing that despite that, because of support and policies and procedures that we can put in place around that. And the final thing on there was around 83% felt some kind of stigma. So I still think there's a long way to go, but as with everything, one step at a time, by talking and by taking some action, we'll start to break this down. The last point on this slide then is just 3 things, because we've talked about it quite in a big picture way with the organisation, with policies and things that you can do, but thinking about you as an employer or managers, looking at just from that perspective, there's just 3 sort of takeaways that we thought were quite useful to think about. One is around knowing your team, and part of that is having regular one-to-ones with your team, so kind of what's going on in work, potentially a bit about what's going on at home. That can really help you tailor and individualize how you support, encourage and get the best out of your team members. And it becomes less of a, I need to sit down and tell you something quite serious. It may be something that you already know about. So having those regular one-to-ones can really help. Sort of very basically, offer the support in the same way that you would with any other health situation. But it does help to be more educated on the specifics of it. And you do have a duty to make sure that the working environment as a manager is suitable for your employees and anything that they may be going through at that time. And the final thing is just remember, it isn't one size fits all. What works for one person won't work for another. But knowing your team and kind of treating them as individuals will really help in this situation. So then just on to the final part before we go into Q&A, we're just about how to turn your thoughts into action. So if we just go on to the next slide. Just want to bring to your attention the Menopause Workplace Pledge. Now, this was launched by the Wellbeing of Women charity and has so far been signed by more than 2,700 employers, which includes the BBC, Tesco and Royal Mail. And basically it's about committing to supporting employees who are going through the menopause or perimenopause by providing practical adjustments, talking openly, positively, and even more importantly, just being very respectful about the subject. I would really encourage you, if you haven't, to Google the Menopause Workplace Pledge and look at what the charity has launched and what organisations are signing up to do as part of this. And I think it's a really good sort of solid focal point for organisations to all commit to the same thing. So if you do get some time, go and have a look at that as part of your research. And then the final point before we go into Q&A, we've talked a lot about what you should do and the steps that you should take, but I just want to finish by talking really about how to deliver the menopause strategy. I think if you are developing a policy, once that policy has been developed, it's really important how you communicate that out there to line managers, to team leaders, to employees themselves. And it's about communicating it out via numerous channels, whether that's in an email, whether that's in staff updates, meetings, whether that's in one-to-ones, whether it's in your monthly town halls or whatever you call your kind of business updates. Think about how you can get the information out there about the policy in the most effective way, and often that comes with doing it through multiple channels. Talk openly about the menopause in the workplace. Don't shy away from it. is a hot topic at the moment. People will be reading about it in the press, they'll be reading about it in HR magazines, in business magazines, online. Talk about it and show that your organisation has recognised that it's an important thing to do. Just make sure that it is open and honest, and then think about how you can translate that into training line managers on how to have those conversations, because there will be things that you can put in place in a policy to say to managers, this is the process you should follow, but don't forget the softer skills. How can the managers have those conversations confidently and that they don't feel awkward and embarrass themselves? Teach them the softer skills around that. And then there's the opportunity to organise events, whether that's workshops, awareness sessions, creating internal support groups or working groups where employees feel that they've got a safe space where they can discuss their experience and also offer some peer-to-peer support. That kind of brings us to the end. So just to summarise what we have covered before we go into Q&A, we just go on to the last slide. Sort of the stats that I've kind of I've left on here are some of the main things that I feel like you should know in leaving here. And if I just start at the top, I'll just kind of whiz through those as lasting things for you to take away. Over 70% of employees who were surveyed in the survey we talked about earlier have experienced some menopause-related symptoms, and then the staggering stat that 1 in 10 have actually left the workforce because of this. I think it's really important that menopause discussions are essential to retain experienced employees who are going through this. And it also, from a practical and legal point of view, you need to know how to avoid the pitfalls of unfair dismissal. There is still a thing, though, that menopause remains a taboo subject in many workplaces, and you need to think about what you can do to break that. Think about the key areas you want to include in a menopause strategy, if that's what you're going to put forward, and this is around policies, supporting employees, putting in support systems and breaking down that stigma. You need to make sure that your policies address the principles of menopause in the workplace and lay out those responsibilities, activities, and the processes that should be followed. But then just think in general that employers can support menopausal employees, and they can do this in a number of ways, and we've talked about them. But there is a benefit to the organisation if you commit to supporting employees through this. You will retain those experienced employees that you want to, and that will have a fundamental impact on the success of your business. So conscious that was an awful lot to take in, but as I said, take it away, think about it, reflect on it. For anyone who is a Morpay customer, there is always the option to call through to the HR team at Morpay if you've got any specific questions or want more information around the support. Obviously, if you are not a Morpay customer at the moment, there's still lots of information out there, and you can come through to one of our team who would be able to help you in the future possibly. But what I'd like to do now is hand back to Molly to see what questions we've got.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Michelle. That was really, really helpful. Thank you so much. We're just having a little look through the questions now. So please continue to drop them in the questions box, and we're going to pick them up and work through them. Okay, so first question, Michelle. How can we manage 4 ladies in the office who are of a perimenopause age? And that's from Sophie.
Okay, so 4 ladies in the office. I mean, I'm not sure whether the question is that that's quite a high proportion of the office, and that's the way the question is kind of leaning. Whether it's 1, whether it's 4, whether it's a certain proportion of your workforce, I think it's about approaching it in the same way. It's sitting down and making sure that you give those individuals time in their one-to-ones. Take each one on its own merits. They will all be experiencing it in different ways. So make sure that as a manager in HR that you've got the time to sit down with those individuals. I would advise against asking too many probing questions. You are there to listen and offer support. You know, it can feel like you might need to demand what's going on. It certainly isn't that. Let them come to you, but give them the space and time to do that. So I would approach each one individually, make sure that you can tailor it to what they are going through, and then think about each of them as individuals. But what's really important is that you should have a framework around that sets out your organisation's approach to supporting women and people going through the menopause, that they will feel themselves more supported, and as a collective group as well. But if there is anything specific on an individual that you're not sure about, that kind of lends itself to an employee relations issue around things like absence, then make sure you seek advice on that particular case.
Brilliant, thank you, Michelle. Another question here in regards to running workshops to raise awareness. So the question is, how do you go about finding someone that's reputable and knowledgeable in menopause to run this, especially if it's to be aimed at line managers?
Yeah, I think most HR professionals would be able to tackle this in some way, and obviously there is a way. You can Google and there'll be the charities, you know, like the one that I've talked about with the pledge. They would probably be able to point you in the direction of somebody. Just talking from our own experience within Morpay, we, in our HR consultants team, a lot of this came on the back of one of our own team members who had over recent years gone through the menopause herself, and she kind of became our leading champion for this. And it's been great to have her on the team, sort of educating other people about it. But from that, we've been able to create a really thorough suite of options. So sometimes it is just talking to the individuals who are offering this training and trying to understand where their motivation came from, where they've got their information from. And sometimes it can just come from first-hand experience, and that is always a really good thing. But there are lots of reputable training companies out there.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Next question from Natalie is, one of our challenges is that employees are saying their menopause is leading to their performance issues. How do we determine what is related to menopause and what is a genuine performance concern?
That is a really, really good question, and also probably quite a difficult question to answer, because I have seen as an HR professional similar kind of cases, whether it's somebody saying it's related to their menopause or it's related to their mental health or other issues. It is always really difficult. What you've got to remember is, again, what I've said before, you are not a doctor in this situation. And the biggest thing that I would recommend is to get an occupational health review. Have all the facts and data around performance, seek some medical advice through occupational health, and then make sure that you put in place support to help them overcome this, and then see where that leads. I would obviously advise against diving straight in and you making a judgment call that it isn't because of the menopause, because we're not, as HRs or leaders, medically qualified to do that. To seek some medical support around that, about guidance, put in place measures to help them, and then monitor it from there. But always seek HR or legal advice on the merits of that as an employee relations case. But it's a very, very tricky situation.
Thanks, Michelle. Another question here from Nikki. Nikki has said all the pictures on your presentation showed women, but do the same rules apply to men who also may be going through the menopause? Do we need to consider anything else for men?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and hopefully you've noticed that throughout our presentation, we've often referred to individuals, employees or people, to take account of the fact that it may be men that are also going through the menopause. You do need to think about that in your policy and how you approach and address it. And there may be some layers of complexity that you might want to seek out on an individual case basis. but a broad brush is that the same logic will apply to either gender, or if they are going through the menopause. It's the same kind of principles.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Question here, following the advice from the Equality and Human Rights Commission, is there anything extra that we should be doing around determining whether menopause is a disability? And that's from Helen.
I think this is probably one, if you've got an individual case around a disability, because it will also depend on the individual. And obviously, there isn't quite a definitive answer, but with menopause, as with any kind of illness, there is always a potential that it may be considered a disability depending on the impact that it has on the individual. As I said right at the beginning, the symptoms impact people in different ways and to varying degrees. So there isn't a definitive answer of yes or no, it's a disability, but I would always err on the side of caution that there's potential that the symptoms could be so severe that they may be classed as a disability. And where you are in that case, seek specific legal advice on how to approach this to make sure that you don't fall into the trap of making a decision yourself or as a business one way or the other without consulting further. It's a very good question.
Perfect. We've just got time for a couple more questions. We have one here. How would you recommend to best influence leadership to implement a menopause policy if they do not see this as a high priority?
I think always the best way to influence leadership if they're not seeing it as a priority is to present facts and figures and data. Some of the data that we presented in the presentation and some of the stats are quite startling. And when you break down those stats and then start to think about the impact that that could have on the bottom line of the organisation, it becomes something that is quite real. If you are able to look widely in society about the overall impact it's having, but then break it down into your organisation, you know, look at your own absence statistics. Try and see, are you recording the reasons for absence? Are you understanding if things are linked to the menopause or if they're potentially linked to the menopause? That then really translates to sort of a bottom line impact if employees are not feeling they're able to perform to the best of ability or they're taking time off because of their symptoms. That is going to have an impact. So that's the first thing that I would think about. And the other area is around engagement. In general, even if somebody is not currently going through the menopause or the perimenopause, but it might be something that happens to them in the future, knowing that their business is taking a proactive, positive stance will have a real impact on engagement. And it might be even something that you want to consider adding to your engagement survey around how people feel about the support that they would get around something specific like menopause. I really think kind of going with the facts and figures and presenting that, it's going to be one of those that will take time. It is gaining momentum. It's being talked about a lot more, but there is still work to do, and I think there'll be still barriers to overcome in the future. But there are certain ways that you could help convince a business that it is something worthwhile looking at.
Thank you, Michelle. We have just one more question we've just about got time for, which is, do you provide training or support for menopause?
Yes, we absolutely do. As I mentioned before, we have had a team member ourselves who, on the back of her own experiences, became our real champion within the organisation. And if you go on our website, you'll find some great articles written by her. She's called Elaine Pritchard. She's put some great articles together, and we've sort of developed policies, strategies and training on the back of this. And it's something that we are really keen to keep pushing and keep advocating. And this does also line up with what we're hearing from our own customers. We want to be proactive about it, but this is matching up with a lot more customers ringing up with either individual issues. And going back to the question before about a disability, you know, they're the sorts of questions we have been getting over whether the individuals in one of our customers, whether it could be classed as disability, and we help them through that, or whether it's more around policies. So matching those two things together, that we've seen this as a real hot topic within, and sort of a key trend at the moment. And we are absolutely pulling together all the support that can be needed. So if anybody is interested, if you're a customer, talk to your account manager, or if you're not, we'll be able to get some information over to you about the different ways that we can support.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michelle, and thank you so much everyone who asked questions. Some really good questions in there and some great insightful answers. Thank you, Michelle. I'd just like to point you in the direction of our Knowledge Centre, which we've briefly touched upon today. It's really easy to find in the menu on our website, and it's packed with lots of really helpful resources, including upcoming webinars, guides and blogs, and everything in there is free to download. And finally, if you would like to find out more about our HR and employment law services, please drop a message into the Q&A panel and one of my colleagues will contact you. Our HR advice line runs 24/7, 365 days a year. So no matter when an HR issue crops up, best practice employment law advice is always available over the phone, anytime, delivered by a highly experienced team of qualified experts. So just before we finish, you will see a prompt to fill out a poll when we close the webinar. We're just looking for some opinions and some insights to help us tailor our research, resources and content for our listeners and readers. So if you have got a few spare seconds to complete that poll, then we would really appreciate it. So that's everything from us today. Everyone who's attended will receive a recording of the webinar and a copy of the slides later on this afternoon. Thank you so much, Michelle, for hosting today. You've been fantastic as always. And thank you to everyone who has joined. I hope you all found it really useful and I hope you have a lovely day. I'll close the webinar now. Thank you.